Lakota warrior said, "Railroad destroys sacred land." How one woman proved love conquers all. The wind moved slowly across the open plains, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain. The land stretched far beyond what the eye could see, rolling hills rising and falling like waves. Frozen in time, for generations, the Lakota people had lived here, walking paths known only through memory and story. Every hill had meaning. Every river had a name that held history. To outsiders, it looked like empty land. To those who belonged to it, it was alive. Tasunka stood at the edge of a low ridge, watching a line of men moving across the valley below. They walked in straight lines, measuring distance with metal tools and placing wooden stakes into the ground. The stakes looked small against the vast horizon, but he understood what they meant. They were marks of change, signs that something powerful was coming. He had seen small groups before, hunters, traders, travelers, but never like this. These men moved with certainty, as if the land had already agreed to their plans.
Behind him, a group of Lakota elders waited quietly. The hour is.
They did not speak much. They did not need to. Their silence carried more weight than many words. Tasunka felt their expectations resting on his shoulders. He was known for his calm thinking and his ability to speak with both strength and patience. The elders trusted him to understand what was happening and to find a path that would protect their people without bringing unnecessary conflict. He walked down the slope slowly, each step careful, until he reached a distance where the workers noticed him. Some paused and stared. Others continued their work, pretending not to see him. A man in a dark coat stepped forward. He appeared to be in charge, holding papers and speaking loudly to the others. "You should not place markers here," Tasunka said in steady, clear English. He had learned the language over years of trading and meeting travelers. His voice was calm, but firm. The man looked surprised, then slightly annoyed. "We have permission?" he replied quickly.
"This land will carry a railroad. Progress is coming."
Tasunka's gaze moved toward the hills behind the workers. "This land is sacred," he said. "It holds the memory of my people. The railroad will destroy more than grass and soil." Some of the workers laughed quietly, not out of cruelty but from discomfort. They did not understand his words, or perhaps they did not want to. The man in the dark coat waved a hand dismissively. "Times change," he said. "You must accept that." He had learned that anger closed ears faster than silence. Instead, he watched as another stake was pushed into the earth. He turned away and walked back toward the ridge, feeling the weight of something heavy growing inside him. Later that day, a wagon arrived carrying new faces. Among them was a young woman named Eliza. She stepped down carefully, brushing dust from her skirt as she looked around with curiosity rather than excitement. Unlike some of the others, she did not see only opportunity. She noticed the sky, the quiet distance, and the feeling that the land held stories she did not yet understand. Eliza had joined the railroad project because she believed it would connect people and create new chances for those struggling to survive. She came from a town where work was scarce, and the promise of travel and purpose had drawn her westward. But as she looked around, she sensed tension she had not expected. Her eyes fell on the distant figure of Tasunka standing against the horizon. There was something about his stillness that caught her attention. He was not moving or shouting. He simply watched, as if measuring something invisible. One of the workers noticed her staring.
"Don't mind him," he said.
"Some of the locals don't like change." Eliza nodded politely but said nothing. She had learned that quick judgments often hid deeper truths. Days passed, and the rhythm of work grew stronger. The sound of hammers striking metal echoed across the plains. Horses carried supplies. Fires burned at night as workers shared stories and laughter, trying to forget the exhaustion of long days. Tasunka returned often, sometimes alone, sometimes with elders. Each time he spoke calmly, repeating his warning. Some workers began to feel uneasy around him, not because he was aggressive, but because his quiet certainty made them question their own actions. Eliza watched these interactions carefully. She noticed how he never raised his voice or threatened anyone. He simply spoke of respect for the land and the need to listen. His words stayed with her long after their conversations ended. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the sky gold and red, she walked away from the camp to find a moment of quiet. She followed a path toward a small hill and stopped when she realized Tasunka was already there, looking out over the valley. They stood in silence for a while before she spoke. "You believe the railroad will harm this place?" He glanced at her briefly, surprised by her gentle tone. "Yes," he said. "Not only the land, the people." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Some believe it will help many others." He nodded slowly. "Change always helps some and hurts others. The question is whether those who suffer were given a choice."
Eliza felt a strange mix of admiration and discomfort.
She had never considered progress from that perspective. For the first time since arriving, doubt began to grow in her heart. In the following days, she paid closer attention to conversations among the railroad leaders. She heard plans discussed quickly, decisions made without considering local traditions or history. She noticed maps marked with lines that cut directly through areas the Lakota people treated with great care. Meanwhile, within the Lakota camp, tension increased. Younger members felt anger rising as sacred spaces were disturbed. Tasunka worked tirelessly to keep peace, reminding them that understanding must come before action. One morning, a group of workers unknowingly began digging near a hill that held deep spiritual meaning. Lakota families gathered nearby, their faces filled with quiet sorrow. Eliza witnessed the moment and felt a sudden heaviness in her chest. She realized that what the workers saw as simple ground was, for others, a place tied to memory and identity. That evening she approached Tasunka again. Their conversation lasted longer this time. He spoke about stories passed down through generations, about ancestors who walked the same paths long before railroads existed. She listened carefully, feeling her understanding slowly change. Their connection remained respectful and cautious. There was no sudden closeness, only the gradual building of trust between two people from different worlds. As the days moved forward, the railroad project continued, but something had shifted inside Eliza. She no longer saw the stakes in the ground as harmless markers. They now felt like lines drawn across living history. Tasunka's warning echoed louder with each passing day. Progress was coming, but at what cost? And who would decide which voices mattered? The plains remained wide and silent, holding their secrets as the first signs of conflict began to grow. The days grew longer as the railroad work continued across the plains. The sound of metal tools and moving wagons became part of the daily rhythm, echoing through the valleys where once only wind and birds had filled the air. Workers moved quickly, focused on schedules and orders that came from faraway offices. To many of them, this was just another job. They saw the land as wide and empty, ready to be shaped by their effort. But for the Lakota families nearby, the changes felt heavy. Paths once used for quiet walks or ceremonies now held footprints of strangers. Fires burned in new places. Trees were cut to clear space for tracks. Even the animals seemed uneasy, moving further away from the growing noise. Tasunka watched carefully, walking between his people and the railroad camp almost every day. His face remained calm, but inside he felt a growing urgency. He knew anger was spreading among younger members of the tribe. Some believed words were no longer enough. They wanted action, something stronger that would force the railroad to stop. One afternoon, a small group approached him. Their voices carried frustration. "They do not listen," one young man said. "We speak, and they continue. The land is crying, and still they build."
Tasunka listened without interrupting.
He understood their pain. He had felt it too when he first saw the wooden stakes pressed into sacred ground. But he also knew that sudden actions could bring consequences that hurt everyone. "We must think carefully," he said quietly. "If we answer harm with anger, more harm will follow. We must find another way." Some agreed, but others walked away unsatisfied. Tasunka felt the weight of leadership pressing harder on him with every passing day. Meanwhile, in the railroad camp, Eliza's thoughts became more restless.
She had started noticing details she once ignored. She saw how workers joked about the local people without understanding them.
He heard leaders speak about deadlines and profits, rarely mentioning the lives affected by their decisions. One evening, while organizing supplies near the main wagon, she overheard two supervisors talking.
They spoke quickly, assuming no one else was listening. "We can't slow down," one said.
"If we stop for every complaint, the project will fail."
"And what about the burial sites people mentioned?" the other asked quietly. "Doesn't matter," came the reply.
"We weren't told to confirm anything, just keep moving." The words felt heavy in her ears. She had believed the company tried to respect local concerns, but now doubt grew stronger. She wondered how many decisions were made without honesty. Later that night, she sat by a small fire, watching sparks rise into the dark sky. The plains felt different now, less peaceful and more uncertain. She thought about Tasunka's calm voice and the way he spoke of the land as if it were family. The next morning she walked away from camp again, following a path she had begun to know well. She found him near a river, kneeling by the water. "You come often," he said without turning, as if he already knew she was there. "I need to understand," she replied softly. He stood and faced her. The sunlight touched his face, showing lines of quiet strength shaped by years of experience. "What do you wish to understand?" he asked. "Why this place matters so much," she said. "I thought land was just land, but now I feel like I am missing something important."
Tasunka considered her words carefully.
He began speaking slowly, explaining how stories were tied to the earth, how ceremonies connected people to the past, and how certain hills and rivers held memories that could not be replaced. Eliza listened deeply. For the first time, she felt she was learning rather than judging. Their conversations continued over the following days. Trust grew step by step, built through honesty. She shared her own struggles, her reasons for joining the railroad, and her hope that progress could bring opportunity without harm. He did not dismiss her beliefs. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions that made her see both sides more clearly. As tension increased, small misunderstandings between workers and Lakota families became more common. One day, a group of workers unknowingly moved supplies onto a ceremonial area. Elders approached quietly, asking them to stop. Some workers apologized immediately, but others became defensive, feeling accused of wrongdoing. Eliza arrived just as voices began rising. She stepped between the groups, speaking calmly and translating where needed. Her presence helped ease the situation, and eventually the workers moved their supplies elsewhere. Afterward, Tasunka thanked her. "You listened," he said. "That is rare." She smiled slightly. "I am still learning." Rumors began spreading through the camp that the Lakota warrior was planning something against the railroad. Some workers felt nervous, creating stories that grew larger with each retelling. Eliza knew most of these rumors were not true. She had seen how strongly he worked to maintain peace. Still, fear is powerful. A few guards started watching the surrounding hills more closely. The atmosphere grew tense, like a storm waiting to break. One evening, as the sky turned deep blue and stars appeared slowly, Eliza attended a small gathering at the Lakota camp. She had been invited by an elder woman who believed understanding could only grow through shared moments. She watched as children laughed near a fire and elders told stories that carried both joy and sadness. Songs rose softly into the night air, filled with meaning she could not fully understand but could deeply feel. In that moment, she realized how little she had known before arriving here. The people she once saw as obstacles now felt like neighbors with rich lives and histories. As she walked back toward the railroad camp, her thoughts felt heavier, but clearer. She knew she could no longer ignore what she had learned. The railroad continued moving forward, but inside her something had changed. She began asking questions in meetings, gently challenging decisions that ignored local concerns. Some leaders appreciated her perspective, while others saw her as slowing progress. Tasunka also felt change approaching. He sensed that time was running short. The railroad line was moving closer to areas he knew would cause deep pain if disturbed. One evening he stood on the ridge again, watching the sunset spread color across the plains. Eliza joined him quietly. "Two worlds," she said softly. "Both believe they are right."
He nodded.
"Yes. The question is whether they can listen before it is too late." The wind moved through the grass around them, carrying both hope and uncertainty. Neither knew what the coming days would bring, but both understood that their choices would shape more than their own lives. The tension across the plains had grown thicker with every passing day. Workers pushed forward with the railroad, unaware of how close they were coming to sacred sites. The metal wheels, hammers, and the rhythm of labor filled the air with a mechanical noise that seemed to clash with the soft whispers of the wind through the grass. To the settlers it was progress. To the Lakota people, it was an invasion of everything they had held sacred for generations. Tasunka felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like never before. Every morning, he walked along the perimeter of the construction, quietly observing, ensuring that no action would cause unnecessary harm. But inside, he could feel the growing restlessness of his community. Younger men and women, proud and fierce, began speaking more boldly, questioning whether peaceful warnings would ever be enough.
"They hear us, but they do not listen," one young warrior said. "Words cannot stop them."
Action is needed. Tasunka understood the anger and the fear behind the words. He had felt it himself. But he also knew that impulsive action could bring disaster. If blood was spilled, the blame would fall not only on the settlers, but also on his own people. He had a duty to protect the land and the people, and rash decisions could destroy both. Meanwhile, Eliza had grown more aware of the situation than anyone else in the railroad camp. She had spent countless hours observing the Lakota gatherings, walking the plains with Tasunka, and learning about the sacred places that the workers were slowly encroaching upon. What she saw with her own eyes troubled her deeply. Every marker driven into the ground, every clearing made for rails or supply wagons, carried with it the potential for permanent loss. One afternoon she found herself walking alone toward a hill she had learned was sacred to the Lakota. The sun had begun to dip low, painting the grass in shades of gold and amber. As she approached, she saw the footprints of workers cutting too close to the ceremonial area. Her heart tightened. She knew the elders would be deeply troubled. She moved quickly, hoping to intervene before a mistake became permanent. She spotted Tasunka standing silently near the hill. His posture was calm but firm, eyes scanning the area as if he could see every possibility.
She approached him.
"They don't know," she whispered. "They have no idea what this place means."
He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with quiet understanding.
"Then we must show them," he said. "But we must do it carefully. Anger will only close ears." Eliza nodded, realizing that his wisdom went beyond words. It was not just knowledge of the land, but knowledge of people, their fears, their assumptions, and their limits. Together, they devised a plan to protect the site without causing conflict. Eliza would speak to the supervisors, while Tasunka would guide the workers away gently, showing them the importance of what lay beneath the soil. That evening she went to the supervisor's tent, presenting what she had learned. Her voice was steady, but her heart raced. "There are burial sites here," she said. "Sacred places. If construction continues as planned, you will destroy something that cannot be replaced."
At first, the men were defensive.
Some tried to argue that the land was just soil, that progress must come first. But Eliza's calm persistence, along with the careful explanation she had gathered from Tasunka and the elders, began to make an impact. Slowly, they agreed to move some equipment and adjust their path. It was not a complete victory, but it was a step toward respect. Meanwhile, the young warriors of the Lakota tribe continued to grow impatient. They saw the slow pace of change and feared the delays would mean the sacred land would still be harmed. Tasunka spoke to them in long, quiet conversations, reminding them that patience and strategy could save more than anger ever could. "You are brave," he told them one evening, "but bravery is not only in action, it is also in thought. One wrong move will not only hurt them, it will hurt us." Eliza continued to spend time with Tasunka and the elders, learning stories that had been passed down for generations. She listened to the songs sung at sunset, the quiet chants that spoke of ancestors and the sacred land. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she had understood before arriving. Every tree, every hill, every stream had a story. The markers in the ground, the clearing of trees. They were not just obstacles or minor changes. They were erasing memory, connection, and life. It was during one of these evenings that she noticed something troubling. Some of the younger workers had begun to make jokes about the sacred sites, seeing them as superstition rather than history. One laughed, calling the burial hill a rock in the way of progress.
Eliza felt anger rise, but she forced herself to stay calm. She approached them quietly.
"This is not just rock," she said gently, trying not to sound like a lecture. "There are people connected to this land. If you destroy it, you destroy their memory and their history." The workers paused, uncomfortable. Some nodded, others shrugged. It was a small moment, but Eliza realized that sometimes even small words could plant a seed of understanding. As the weeks passed, the standoff between the two worlds, the railroad and the Lakota, grew more intense. Workers became wary when they saw Tasunka watching them from a distance. Rumors began to circulate that the Lakota would take action if their land continued to be disturbed. Fear spread quietly among the workers, though most had no true understanding of the consequences. Eliza found herself in a new position. She had become a bridge between the two sides. She could speak both languages, translate intentions, and mediate disputes before they escalated. Her role was delicate, and each day brought new challenges. Some supervisors appreciated her input, while others saw her efforts as interference. But Eliza remained firm. She could not ignore the truths she had learned. One afternoon, a supervisor approached her with a hesitant expression. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," she said simply. "It is real. If you continue without care, harm will follow." The man nodded slowly, leaving her with a mixture of hope and concern. Progress would continue, but perhaps now it would be more thoughtful. Back with the Lakota, Tasunka continued to guide his people with patience and wisdom. He reminded them that while fear and anger were natural, they must choose actions that would preserve their community and their sacred land. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Eliza walked to the river where Tasunka was already standing. The water reflected the colors of the sky, peaceful and unchanging despite the conflict around it. "You see now," he said softly, "why this land is sacred? I see why it matters, not just for you, but for everyone connected to it." They stood together in silence for a long time, listening to the river and the wind. In that quiet, they understood something important. The land was more than soil or hills. It was life, memory, and connection. Protecting it required courage, patience, and respect. As the days continued, small victories and setbacks alternated. Some workers adjusted plans, others did not. Rumors of anger and sabotage grew, but Eliza and Tasunka worked quietly to prevent escalation. Every conversation, every gentle warning, every small adjustment mattered. Eliza realized that love was not only about two people, it was also about respect for the land and for the people whose lives were intertwined with it. And in that realization, her bond with Tasunka deepened, not through dramatic moments, but through shared purpose and understanding. The railroad continued to push forward, but slowly, a new balance began to take shape. Awareness grew among workers. Patience grew among the Lakota. And in the quiet moments at sunset, when the plains glowed gold and the wind whispered through the grass, Eliza and Tasunka could see the possibility of hope, even amidst the growing conflict. The next steps would be difficult. The railroad was moving closer to the most sacred areas, and tensions were rising. But for now, understanding had taken root, small but strong, preparing them for the challenges ahead. In that fragile space between conflict and compromise, the story of two worlds learning to listen, and of one woman finding courage through understanding, continued to unfold.
The day had arrived when the railroad workers moved closer to the area the Lakota people had long held sacred. The air was thick with tension, heavier than the warm winds that rolled across the plains. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if they sensed the importance of what was about to happen. For years, the hills, the river, and the wide stretches of grass had held stories, memories, and ceremonies. Now, human machines and ambition threatened to erase what had endured for generations. Tasunka stood on the edge of the sacred hill, watching the workers below. His face remained calm, but inside he felt a quiet storm. He had spent weeks guiding his people, explaining that patience and careful planning were more powerful than anger. Yet now, the final test was at hand. The younger warriors had gathered behind him, their eyes filled with determination and fear. Some wanted to act immediately, to stop the workers with force. Tasunka knew that any rash move could end badly, but he also understood their frustration. Eliza walked beside him. She had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. She had talked to the supervisors, presented evidence about burial sites, and worked to create understanding between the two sides. But the weight of the moment was unlike anything she had imagined. She knew that words might not be enough if the workers ignored her. Below, the men continued their work, moving supplies and tools, unaware of how close they were to disturbing something sacred. The noise of hammers and wagons echoed across the plains, clashing against the quiet dignity of the hill. Eliza felt her heart tighten. Every step the workers took on this ground risked the stories and memories it held. Tasunka raised a hand, signaling for silence among his people. The younger warriors stepped back, their shoulders tense but obedient. They trusted him, though their eyes still flashed with fear and frustration. Eliza approached the supervisor again. She held a folder containing sketches, maps, and notes from the elders. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "You must stop," she said firmly. "The land you are about to cross contains sacred burial sites. These are not empty fields. There are people here, past and present, connected to this place. If you continue, the consequences will be serious." The supervisor looked at her, hesitation flickering in his eyes. Some of the workers glanced up, noticing Tasunka standing above them on the hill. His posture was calm, but the presence he carried made even the bravest pause. They felt, though they did not understand completely, that this man represented something older, something stronger than fear or anger. Eliza opened the folder and showed the maps. "This area," she said, pointing carefully, "contains burial sites. Construction here will destroy them. You can change the path slightly and avoid harming the sacred ground." The men murmured among themselves. Some still argued, worried about schedules and costs. But others began to listen, seeing for the first time that their work carried more than just physical consequences. It carried history, memory, and respect. Tasunka stepped forward, speaking in a calm, steady voice that carried across the distance. "We do not ask you to stop all work," he said. "We only ask that you respect what has been here for generations. Change is necessary, yes, but not at the cost of our people's history. There is a way to continue without destroying what is sacred." The words hung in the air. Workers lowered their tools slightly, feeling the weight of what he said. Some supervisors began talking quietly among themselves. The tension was electric. One wrong word, one misstep, and the situation could erupt. Eliza felt the eyes of the young warriors on her. She nodded subtly, reminding them to remain calm. They had listened to Tasunka's wisdom for weeks. Now it was their turn to trust him again. Finally, the head supervisor stepped forward. He looked at the hill, at Tasunka, and at the maps in Eliza's hands. Slowly, he spoke. "All right," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "We will adjust the path. We will not disturb the burial sites."
A collective sigh of relief rose from the Lakota gathering.
The younger warriors relaxed slightly, though their eyes remained wary. They knew this was only one small victory. There would be more challenges ahead, but for now, disaster had been avoided. Tasunka allowed himself a small nod of approval. He turned to Eliza. "You spoke well," he said softly. Your courage made this possible. Eliza shook her head. It was not just me. It was you, and the elders, and everyone who shared their knowledge. I only helped carry the message. Together, they walked down from the hill to speak with the workers directly. The conversation was cautious and careful. Eliza translated where needed, making sure the intentions of the Lakota people were clear. Tasunka spoke slowly, explaining the importance of the land, not with threats, but with the weight of truth and understanding. The workers began to nod, some asking questions. They wanted to understand the history and meaning of the place. Tasunka told stories of the ancestors, of ceremonies that had been held for hundreds of years. He explained the rivers and hills, the paths that connected families, and the importance of every small detail in the land. Eliza watched as understanding slowly spread. What had begun as conflict was becoming dialogue. The workers realized that they were not simply building tracks across empty plains. They were crossing into living history. Night fell and the plains were quiet once again. Fires burned at the Lakota camp, and the elders spoke in soft tones about what had happened that day. Tasunka sat with the young warriors, sharing wisdom, patience, courage, and careful thought. He said, "These are more powerful than force. Today, we showed that understanding can prevent harm." Eliza stood nearby, looking out over the valley. The railroad would continue, of course, but for now, respect had won. She realized that her role was not just to observe, but to act thoughtfully, to be a bridge between two worlds that often fail to see each other clearly. In the days that followed, small adjustments were made to the railroad path. Machinery was moved carefully, and workers were briefed on the importance of the areas they were near. While the project continued, it did so with greater awareness. Tasunka and Eliza spent hours walking the plains together. They shared stories, sometimes quietly, sometimes laughing softly at small moments of relief. Their bond grew through shared purpose, not through dramatic gestures, but through understanding and respect. As the sun set each evening, painting the hills in gold and amber, they often paused to watch the plains. The wind moved slowly through the grass, carrying memories, stories, and the quiet satisfaction of a day when peace had held strong. It was clear that the challenges were not over. The railroad would push further, and tensions might rise again. But that day had set a precedent. Words, courage, and patience had prevented harm. Love for the land and care for the people had created a path forward where others might have chosen conflict. Eliza understood, more than ever, that love was not just a feeling. It was action, responsibility, and respect. And Tasunka understood that bridging worlds required trust, listening, and the courage to speak truth, even when it was difficult. In the quiet of the plains, they walked together, carrying with them the hope that understanding could continue to guide both people and progress. And in that hope, the story of two worlds learning to listen, and of one woman helping to protect what was sacred, continued to grow, strong and steady, against the rush of change. The weeks that followed the standoff became a period of careful balance. The railroad continued to move forward, but with adjustments that respected the sacred land. Workers had been briefed more thoroughly, and supervisors began to understand that progress without respect would not only harm the land, but also the trust of the people around them. Slowly, a fragile cooperation formed. It was not perfect, but it was a start. Tasunka walked the plains daily, checking on the construction paths and speaking quietly with the younger warriors. He reminded them that vigilance and patience were still needed. "We cannot assume that peace will last on its own," he said. "It must be nurtured, like a fire that keeps the night warm. If we forget, it can go out too quickly." The younger warriors listened carefully, though their eyes still flickered with worry. Some evenings, they would gather around the fire and speak softly among themselves, sharing stories of ancestors who had defended the land and wondering if they were doing enough to honor them. Tasunka would sit nearby, guiding them with gentle words and examples. He reminded them that strength was not always in physical action, but often in restraint and wise decisions.
Eliza's role had grown more important each day.
She continued to act as a bridge between the railroad workers and the Lakota people. She guided conversations,
translated intentions, and helped ensure that misunderstandings did not escalate into conflict. The respect she had earned allowed her to speak firmly, but also to listen with care. She began to feel a deep connection to the land and to the people who called it home. One morning, as the sun rose over the distant hills, Eliza walked to the river to find Tasunka waiting. The water reflected the bright sky, calm and steady. "You have changed much in the past weeks," Tasunka said, his voice soft but filled with warmth. "You see what is important here, and you help others understand it too." Eliza nodded. "I have learned that some things are bigger than jobs, or schedules, or even plans. They are about people, history, and respect. Without that, nothing we build is truly worth it." They walked together along the riverbank, noticing how the wildlife had begun to return to quieter areas, as if sensing that balance had been restored. Deer grazed carefully, birds flew higher, and the wind whispered through the grass with a gentleness that reminded them of the land's enduring spirit. Across the plains, both communities began to notice small changes. The workers were slower to cut into areas near sacred hills. The Lakota people allowed construction to continue in areas that did not hold critical history. Gradually, both sides began to understand that compromise did not mean giving up, but finding ways to coexist respectfully. One afternoon, news arrived that the railroad company had agreed to officially mark and protect the burial sites and ceremonial areas. They would adjust their tracks permanently and ensure that workers were educated on the land's importance. It was not a complete victory. The railroad still moved through parts of the plains, but it was a significant one. The sacred spaces were preserved, and the voices of the Lakota people had been heard. At the Lakota camp, elders gathered to discuss what had been accomplished. They spoke of the courage of Tasunka, the patience of the warriors, and the guidance Eliza had provided. Their words were gentle but full of pride. "Today," one elder said, "we have shown that understanding can protect our past and guide our future." Tasunka felt a quiet satisfaction. He knew that vigilance would always be needed, that the land and its stories required constant care. But in that moment, he allowed himself a sense of relief. They had preserved something that was more than land. They had preserved memory, identity, and the dignity of generations. Eliza continued to learn from the elders. They shared stories of ancestors, of journeys and trials, of love, hardship, and survival. She listened carefully, often taking notes not to sell or publish, but to remember and honor what she had been allowed to witness. These stories taught her about resilience, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from deep connection to the land. As weeks turned into months, a friendship grew between Tasunka and Eliza. It was not the dramatic kind told in novels or movies. It was subtle, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and deep understanding. They spoke openly, laughed quietly, and sometimes simply walked in silence, watching the plains and listening to the wind. Their bond reflected the lessons they had both learned. That trust is earned slowly, and that love, in its truest form, is rooted in understanding and respect. The younger warriors began to see a new model of courage. They realized that protecting the land did not always require force or confrontation. Sometimes it required patience, careful planning, and finding allies in unexpected places. Eliza had become such an ally, someone from the outside who was willing to learn, to listen, and to act responsibly. One evening, a small celebration took place at the camp. The elders, warriors, and even some of the railroad workers gathered together near a hill that had been preserved. The air was filled with the smell of cooking fires, the sound of soft laughter, and the quiet rhythm of drums and songs. Tasunka stood beside Eliza, watching the younger generation dance and laugh, feeling a sense of hope for the future. "This is what matters," he said quietly. "The land is protected, the people are safe, and understanding has grown." Eliza smiled, looking out at the plains that stretched endlessly under the sunset. "It feels like the land is breathing again," she said, "like it has been healed, even a little." Tasunka nodded. Healing takes time, but every small step counts. Today, the land remembers what we did for it, and the people will remember too.
In the months that followed, the railroad continued, but now with more care.
Workers moved slowly, paying attention to warnings and markers. Supervisors encouraged respect, and Eliza continued to guide conversations, ensuring that both sides understood one another. Small ceremonies were allowed near certain areas to honor the ancestors, a compromise that brought pride and peace to the community. Through it all, Tasunka and Eliza walked the plains together, teaching and learning from one another. Their bond grew stronger, rooted not in urgency or drama, but in shared responsibility and respect. They understood that real change and real love required patience, understanding, and courage in quiet moments. The sacred land remained standing, the hills and rivers continuing to tell the stories of generations past. Children played safely near the plains, learning from elders and observing the respect shown to the land. The Lakota people continued their ceremonies, knowing that their ancestors' memory was honored. Eliza often thought back to the first days she had arrived, to the wooden stakes and the noise of hammers. She remembered feeling overwhelmed and unsure. Now she felt grounded, connected, and grateful for the lessons she had learned. She understood the power of listening, the importance of courage without force, and the quiet strength of the land itself. Tasunka reflected on the journey as well. He had seen the determination of his people, the curiosity and bravery of Eliza, and the capacity for understanding in others. He knew that challenges would come again, but he also knew that the bonds forged and the lessons learned would help guide the future. The plains stretched endlessly, golden in the evening sun. Wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying stories, memories, and hope. The railroad had changed the land, yes, but it had also created a moment where two worlds had learned to listen, to respect, and to act with care. In that quiet, Tasunka and Eliza walked together, knowing that their work and their bond would continue to grow. They had proven that love and understanding could overcome fear and ignorance, that respect could protect what was sacred, and that patience and courage could shape the future in ways that force and anger never could. The plains held their history in every hill, every river, every blade of grass. And now, through care, listening, and quiet courage, that history would continue, safe, honored, and remembered for generations to come. The story of two worlds, one sacred land, and the courage to choose understanding over conflict had reached a chapter of peace. But its lessons would continue to ripple across the plains, carried by the wind, the people, and the enduring spirit of the land itself.